What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Average American Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Tate. This is the podcast for the average American by the average American. A lot of stuff has happened since the last time I saw everyone, everyone being the 6 people who watch these videos, if it's even that many. Anyway, a lot of stuff to dive into and talk about, so we're going to head straight into it. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the ICE stuff in Minnesota. That killing of Alex Preddy, I believe that's how his name is, Pratty, whatever um, whatever his name is. So I've only seen one video about it, so I'm probably not the expert, to be talking about it, but I do have some opinions. I think it's important to share them, regardless of whether or not I am an expert, on such subjects. So, from what I've seen, the camera angle, and I've only seen one, like I said, it looks like while he was on the ground, they tried to remove the gun, or did remove the gun off of him. And then they had about 6 or 7 agents around him, and then one of them discharged their weapon, and then they all discharged their weapons, and then they shot him like 11 times. Now, before I get into the details of it, what I think or my opinions, it's tragic for anybody to die. That was someone's son, someone cared about him, someone loved him. So it's always sad to lose some human life. You don't want to see that happen. But, there is some instances that have occurred prior to this entire situation that seem pretty prevalent. So I'm going to say what I know, to be mostly confirmed factual. He was part of Signal group chats, that's been reported on. He seemed to be, from what I've heard, that he was, part of a organizational setup to try and impede ICE in the state of Minnesota. And I'd like to point out that this whole thing seems very strange, because there's only 250,000 illegal immigrants reported. We don't know if there's more, in Minnesota. So all of this taking place in Minnesota seems really weird. But anyway, so you've seen some of the Signal chats and stuff like that. That apparently he was part of, the top level of these organizational um, meetings, so to speak. And really, it's just texts between people. And he also had an altercation earlier in the month on January 13th with ICE, where he kicked out a taillight and yelled at some officers and stuff like that. So we also have that, where that comes into play, and that matters as well. Um, it doesn't help him in this situation to maybe already be known. I don't know if the officers, in question knew who he was or had an interaction with him. If any of them involved had an interaction with him prior and felt like maybe he was an aggressor or he was someone who was aggressive in general. Um, but regardless, I think that it's important to state that, I think fault lies with everyone involved here. Um, you know, Law enforcement officers are held to a certain standard. When you sign up to do something like that, it's important that you act with a certain level of calm and professionalism. That doesn't seem to be with what's been going on with ICE a little bit. Now, I will say that these guys are way more headhunted, it seems, than regular police officers. This isn't a situation where, it's a cop who regularly patrols. These guys are there for something, and they're actively being worked against by a group of individuals. So it's definitely more high tension, I think, than your average everyday, police to civilian interaction. Obviously, these people are intent on antagonizing and impeding the work of ICE officers, when what they're doing, who they're looking for, all that kind of stuff. So it's important to state that these guys are probably in an agitated state already. I mean, there have been numerous reports, where they've been threatened and had people shoot at them. I can't remember what it was, but there was another documented thing where some guy had shot at them and trapped him in like a hotel. And so it's not like they're on high alert for no reason. Um, and from what I hear, the whole thing that popped off with the Pratty situation, or Pratty, whatever's how you pronounce his name, was that there was a woman over there who was screaming and yelling at ICE, and then an officer walked over and pushed her, very aggressively, to a point in which she could have physically been hurt had she fallen and hit her head. Anything like that could have received some serious injuries, from what I've heard. And then Preddy decided to step in between the two officers. And then after that, it seemed that they wrestled him to the ground and they removed his weapon. And then, like I said, they seemed to discharge and kill him after the fact. Now, it's important to note that I was listening to the episode between Joe Rogan and Andrew Wilson. And I think if you need reference, it's episode 2544 of the JRE. And they were talking about this situation as well. And Joe brought up a good point about, and I'll be the first to say I don't know anything about weapons, guns in general. Good Lord. I just got out of the shower, so bear with me. But I don't know much about guns in general, handguns, assault rifles, shotguns, none of it. So it seems that, from what he said, that there's a common problem with the gun that Preddy had on his person. It's a Sig Sauer P320. Now, basically, because I don't even understand what I'm talking about 100%, I just understand the way it's been explained by individuals who have much more understanding than me. So, it's what's called a striker fire, and there is an element in a striker fire generally that is referred to as a dingus, which is basically a pin that prevents inertia from causing the gun to discharge. For whatever reason, in the P320, I think Joe said before the year 2018 or 2017, the P320 was made without having that in it. And to offset the striker fire, the firing mechanism, they made the trigger very light. So all of that combined makes it so this weapon can have discharges. It's very common from what you can find online. There's lawsuits about it. There's record of people having it discharged while in their holsters, or someone's dropped it on the ground and it's discharged. So there is this theory behind it that they presented, or Joe specifically presented, that this gun could have negligently discharged. It could have very well been possible that the gun went off when being grabbed out of the holster. And it's very important to note that, like, you don't know if there's debris in the chamber or the slide. Did it get caught on anything? Was there something jutting out in the holster that could have pushed this trigger? I mean, the trigger's a hairpin, so it doesn't take much pressure to get it to go off. And so there's a possibility in this situation that all the chaos came together for the perfect moment of this guy having his weapon be discharged involuntarily, and them reacting to that. There's also the thought, or the idea, that there's a second gun, that there was one we couldn't see. Maybe a smaller, caliber that was strapped to his ankle, a 32 or something like that. That maybe he had pulled out of a sock, is what I'm assuming. I don't know. But that's also something that's been suggested. I'll go ahead and say that I don't personally know, what the situation was entirely. We only know what we saw on video. And unfortunately, you have people screaming the entire time. So it's even more difficult to assess the situation from a calm standpoint and really get a feel and understanding of what led up to these actions. But I think the most important takeaway from this is, while I stated how important it is for officers to act professional, it's also important for civilians to act civil. You do these things of agitating individuals with weapons. There's another thing that Rogan and Wilson talked about, was going and having a concealed carry license and having two magazines, and then engaging with law enforcement. They were stating that that's a very bad idea. I would say that it's just a bad idea to engage in confrontation when you are outmanned and outgunned in any situation. Not that we should just act diplomatically in our day to day lives because confrontation always breeds something, poor for the individual or the country, look at foreign wars. That's not what we're talking about. But regardless, assault, battery, murder, all these things, they come from not being able to de escalate or looking for a problem or anything of that nature. So you see, people sometimes put themselves in situations that are completely avoidable. You know, the Renee Good thing, she was asked to get out of her car. Now, I'm not saying the guy should have shot her, and it seems like, you know, that he reacted hastily, if we'll say. Granted, he feared for his life, so it's hard to tell you what you would do in that situation, too. But if she had gotten out of the car or not impeded traffic or done any of the things that led up to all of that antagonizing and all this stuff, it's like when you put yourself in these positions and situations and then you go, "Oh, I don't understand why the consequences were what they were." And that's just disregarding all of your actions that led up to the confrontation in question. It's important for us as civilians to understand that while we have rights, constitutional rights, you also can, behave in a way and express that, like, I don't like what you're doing without creating conflict in which you could lose your life or that you could, take someone else's life. I mean, those should always be last resort situations. And I think that it's really, really important that people understand that civility should be your number one goal when dealing with law enforcement, other individuals, all of that, bro. I try to be as non-confrontational as possible. You keep a calm demeanor. It's always, if you made a mistake, apologize. If a person did, be forgiving. Like these things are the way that we make ourselves, coalesce and create cohesion instead of this huge and negative divide that we have. This rough division that exists in our country, depending on what kind of political ideology that you associate with. And the reality is that while I might disagree with your politics, I do not hate you as a person, even with how much I can't stand liberals. I legitimately can't do it. Can't stand them. However, I do not hate them and I do not wish harm on them. Do I wish that maybe they would be willing to listen to reason? Yeah, for sure. Do I think that it's very dangerous? And I say dangerous not in like, you know, a way to say it's hate speech or any of that dumb shit because I don't believe in that. But it is dangerous to sit there and call people Nazis and fascist and all this stuff because you say something enough, you begin to believe it. You ingrain the idea in yourself, and then all of a sudden you can't discern reality from the reality you've created. It's the same thing as like after a certain amount of time, your memories become recanting of memories. What you remember about the memory is what you say instead of the actual memory. How you tell the story is how the memory becomes. And so it's the same thing. You repeat words and stuff, that works with positive self affirmations, that works with, negative things as well. You do any of that stuff, and it's going to eventually psychologically trick you into believing it. And if you think you're fighting Nazis and fascists, then I believe you're going to think that anything you do is, you know, in the greater good of justice as you would look at it. So I think the rhetoric surrounding this stuff is very, very important. Um, but what I do find very concerning about the situation was the administration's reaction to what happened. Saying, you got the FBI director saying that this guy didn't deserve to have a weapon. He shouldn't have brought a gun. You bring a gun, da 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 da. Cash Patel basically was like, you're inciting violence. It is legal and constitutional, especially in the state of Minnesota, if you have your license and your concealed carry license, to uh, legally carry your firearm wherever you want. Now, like we said, situational awareness, common sense. Should you bring that to a protest where you're protesting against people who are armed and have been agitated and all of those things? Probably not. But at the same time, if you're someone on the other side of that, who's maybe there to, has seen the Renee Good thing and you've seen how aggressive the protests get, you're like, okay, if anything was to pop off, I might need protection. I might want to protect myself. That's well within your right as an American. And for Kash Patel to say that, and then Trump to come out and say, like, oh, I didn't like that he had a gun. It's like, okay, it doesn't really matter what you like. All right? Nobody's asking you if you like that he had a gun. The reality is it's legal, the legality of it. He is perfectly allowed to have his weapon and his firearm with him. And that's what concerns me. Because you go back and you look at the Pam Bondi stuff about hate speech that happened earlier last year. I think it was like in September, October, or whatever. They were talking about the hate speech stuff, especially after the Charlie Kirk shooting. And between that and the two-way stuff they're talking about now, I mean, it's very clear to me that this is a uniparty situation, and I think we've all kind of known that. But the more and more they just put it out there, and that's one of the good things about Trump is that he doesn't know to not say the quiet part out loud, and his administration as well. They all just seem really fucking dumb. Um, I guess to our benefit, to be honest. But they just say the quiet part out loud. They say what they're thinking. You know, um, to kind of pivot topics here, it goes into the Epstein files, right? We got more Epstein files, and this stuff was released, and we got 3.5 million documents, and I'm sure people will go through it. But there's already stuff about weird things about pizza parties. If you're one of those Pizzagate individuals that was really into it back in like 2017, 2018. And then it makes you wonder, like, was the Wayfair stuff legitimate? I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I think it was 24, 23 or 24, when there was like lockers that were like $10,000 on Wayfair, and you're just like, what are they selling? Like, people are alleging that they were selling kids in them, or it was like a front for selling, child trafficking and stuff like that. But either way, you look, Trump's in there, Gates in there, Jay-Z in there, Elon's in there. You've got all this kind of stuff, and allegations are not facts. You know, you have to kind of sort through it, and there's people way smarter than us that are going to take their time and they're going to delve into it, and I commend them for that because we need people like that. Um, but it's important for us to not accuse anybody of doing anything or confirm any biases until we have legitimate evidence in writing that all of these things were happening. We can all make speculations on it, and it's okay to say, well, we see this here and this is really weird, and the wording here is very strange and all that kind of stuff. But until we have concrete evidence, we should not go publicly blasting any single individual. Unless it's Prince Andrew, fuck that guy. Obviously, we know he did it. He was exiled by the royal family, to go fuck off and be in the wilderness, essentially. So, but you have all these things, and it took a bill to get this out. And, the Democrats had it for 4 years and didn't release it. And Trump had to be forced to release it. And so the more and more you look at this, the more just this uniparty stuff just seems to be the way it is. I mean, I'm listening to, Rogan and Dave Smith and some Tim Dillon stuff, and who else? Tucker Carlson doing his interviews with people, and you hear the same rhetoric from all of them, no matter if they're interviewing a political person or not. Tucker maybe is a little more forgiving on it, but the reality is they're all like, yeah, they're all doing the same shit. None of them are really contesting. That's why the midterms are such a fucking joke. They're like, oh, the Republicans are going to lose the midterms and they'll impeach Trump. As if that fucking matters. It's all for show. It does not matter. Whether they impeach him or not. He's still doing the bidding of Israel, and they're still voting for spending bills. Like, I don't know what's changed. Nothing has changed. Not to me. I see shit happening around me that's all the same fucking shit. Way too much money. Everything's way too expensive. There's no talk of cutting spending. They did the Doge thing, and that was a huge fucking failure because they didn't follow through on anything. And then you have all of the vaccine stuff that's going on as well, the criticisms of RFK and what he's brought to the table in terms of his health and human services policies, getting dyes out of food, like, that's a bad thing. And it's all because you're told to not like it, and then, there's plenty of people who have pointed out that they campaign on certain issues to, make sure that they have something to fundraise off of. I mean, look at Roe v. Wade. It stood for how long? And then all of a sudden they were like, nah, we're going to overturn that shit. Because then it gives Democrats something to run on. Excuse me. It's just all this fucking pawn moving the chessboard type shit that they fucking do. And everybody just, I shouldn't say everybody, but a large section of the population just go along with it. Because they just don't have, I don't even want to say they don't have the intelligence. They just don't have the awareness to step outside of themselves and their virtue signaling and the, oh, my side is right, your side is wrong thing, and look at it in a grand scope. And I think there's more people now than ever because of the internet that are looking at it in that way. But, the fact that you're seeing Republicans saying he shouldn't have had a gun and Democrats saying, well, that's his constitutional right. Like, we're living in the fucking matrix, in my opinion, because Democrats have been about gun laws forever. As long as I can remember, they've been trying to take guns away. And, it's hard to say if some mass shootings haven't been planned and stuff like that. And I'm not going to get too deep into that on what I've heard on some of those. But if you're really interested, go look up the Las Vegas shootingmap.com, I believe it was, or go listen to the episode that Tucker Carlson did on his podcast with Ian Carroll. Really good listen. I listened to it like 3 times. And they talk about the Las Vegas shooting and maybe, the theories surrounding it. But anyway, back to, what I'm talking about here and the uniparty problems that we face. It's insane. I mean, we haven't stopped the Zionism, no matter who's been in office. I mean, everything you do that speaks ill of, any Israel choices, you're an automatic anti-Semite. They'll take you out from TV. They'll try to ruin your career. All of that stuff. And you got to sit here and go, like, how the fuck does this tiny little country have so much fucking power? And I don't understand. You have to wonder, what do they have on our politicians? These are the dirtbags and scumbags of our country. Unfortunately, that's who we fucking vote in, because real good people just want to live their life and don't want to be a part of this. But, these are the individuals we have to choose from, and unfortunately, they're all corruptible scumbags who are easily manipulated by money and will do anything to keep the party rolling. And so, all of them are probably, have some kind of blackmail dirt on them. And so I'm assuming that's what we're looking at here. And you see it a little bit with this Epstein stuff. But the real Epstein stuff has got to be, they grabbed, what was it, 14.5 terabytes of fucking information? And there was only 3.5 million documents? Bullshit. There's videos that we're not seeing. There's shit that we're not ever going to see. Same thing with the JFK. Like, they released JFK stuff, and it was so heavily redacted. Why? Because they're not going to tell you they did it, even though it's so fucking clear that they probably did it. But if they don't admit to it, then it just doesn't matter. And it's just one of those things where I'm this last election for sure, and the ensuing year after the election, because I'll be honest, I was like, oh, thank God Trump won. It made me feel a lot better, because the Democrats had been, especially after we saw the Twitter files and all that stuff, it seemed like one party had really been trying to kill free speech, and then they would come for your rights after that, your other rights, your right to bear arms. Who knows? Maybe they'll take away the Fifth Amendment, where you're not allowed to, they'll be like, you got to incriminate yourself. Who fucking knows? But the reality is, it seemed like there was a huge cultural shift because we were tired of, feeling like you couldn't say anything and you had to walk on eggshells around everybody. And so, we got behind the Republican movement, and even myself, as I identify as a libertarian, and the libertarians in general got behind the Republicans because the Democrats had been so bad. And once again, everybody got fooled into thinking it would be different, but oh no, it's really fucking not. And it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where you sit there and you just ask yourself, like, when does it change? Can it change? Can people band together enough to force the change? Um, and I think it's so important that we continue to have open discourse. You know, whether you like Charlie Kirk or not, that was something huge that he was about. And that open discourse of whether we agree or disagree, conservative or liberal, if you can come to a baseline of understanding and saying, oh, we're not going to agree on this topic, but that doesn't mean that I hate you. I have Republican friends, I have Democratic friends, I have friends who don't identify as anything, but they still lean one way or the other. And the reality is, I don't hate any of them. I love them all, and they'll all always be my friends as long as they don't commit some kind of atrocity against me or my family. You know, so we got to stop hating each other for different opinions. I'm okay with having my opinions challenged. Does anybody like being wrong? No, it's a hard pill to swallow. Being wrong fucking sucks. You never go into a conversation and you bring up a fact and they're like, actually, that's not true. And you're like, you know what? I'm so glad you said that. No, you're like, fuck. Like, I thought I knew a thing. I don't know a thing. But that's the reality is none of us know anything and we're constantly learning from each other. And I think when we stop talking to each other, that's when we stop learning and we start just deciding that, like, whatever the person I look up to tells me is what's true. Instead of thinking that, like, the person I disagree with might have a really prevalent point to be made. And it's just particularly important, I think, that we continue to try to have discussions. The diplomacy aspect of it is the most important. Um, with that in mind, I'm going to move on to some of this other stuff that we've seen. The Iran thing for sure is another huge thing. Trump just talked about sending an armada over to Iran. A little tweet. You know how he is. You know, he could be bullshitting, but I'm inclined not to think so, considering the Israeli influence of the Israeli lobby, AIPAC specifically, but also with the fact that we did the 12-day war, and then it seemed very clear to most people, the people I listen to quite often, that that was not the end of it. Netanyahu was not going to let that go. Israel's government was like, fuck that, because you know what? Iran's the only country that out of the memo that Wesley Clark pointed out, where it was 7 countries in 5 years, Iran's the only one where we haven't been able to fully topple the regime yet for them. So I expect us to probably get into another war. Um, the whole Greenland and Venezuela thing is like, I get irritated about that because wars always end up costing us money, right? And the reality is, the American people will probably not get anything out of the Venezuela shit. And I'm just saying that based on what I've seen. Because the last one where there was oil in the Middle East and we went into Iraq and Kuwait and took the oil fields and all that stuff. Hey, I don't know if you know this, but that didn't make us any more prosperous as a country. At least from what I saw. Maybe the Kuwait did because Bill Clinton did have a surplus going into Bush Jr.'s presidency. But regardless, none of that stuff has panned out for us at all. And I can't tell you the last time that we won a war. I mean, the Ukraine one's the most recent one. That's a proxy war, essentially, that we're fighting using another country. Vietnam, Korea. We won the Cold War, but that really wasn't a actual war in terms of it was more metaphorical threatening between both countries until one exhausted its resources and was depleted and then just kind of crumpled of its own ineptitude. Communism will do that to you. Um, So I look at some of these and think that, like, the Venezuela thing seems more like, to me, maybe Trump's thinking business wise and he's going to try to flip that money and help us kill some of the deficit. Which, okay, that's not a horrendous thought because they have a ton of crude oil and they produce it like shit. But it also matters that we don't let Russia and China go in and do that. Sort of Monroe Doctrine type of stuff. So, and I understand that. The same thing as I understand Greenland being super close proximity to us and that we once owned it and we gave it to Denmark and now, he wants to take it back, which is okay and understandable. But the issue I have is that if you didn't do the Iraq war, you didn't do the Vietnam war, you didn't try to do, what was the false flag for Cuba? I can't remember operation right now. Um, Bay of Pigs, the Bay of Pigs, and if you don't do all of this stuff on top of killing the fucking sitting president in 1967, um, if you didn't do all of this shit, I think people wouldn't have a problem getting on board with the Greenland stuff. And you'd probably still get like virtue signaling fucks, but that would be a so much smaller demographic that wouldn't be like spread to the masses like it is. You wouldn't have people being able to virtue signal because for the most part we would have been a pretty peaceful country. But instead, after we won the Revolutionary War and then the War of 1812, and then we won the Mexican American War, the French and Indian Revolution, like we've done war so well that we thought we couldn't lose. And then we started taking L's from small countries, like Vietnam and Korea. Um, what was it? This Desert Storm was one we went in and just won, but then you go to Iraq and, the Iraq War too, actually. And, you know, America hasn't been as good at war in the last half century as because after World War II we were like this is how we build and boom industry, and it ended up costing us more money and lives than it ever produced. So you know and I really think that when you look at World War II, because it pulled us out of a Great Depression, they think that war is the way to make money. And now it really is with people getting paid for it. If you're a politician, you leave, then you go and you serve, on Palantir's board or Halliburton's board. One of those defense contractors that makes billions of dollars doing stuff for the government. And so you get these policies passed and give them deals and all that kind of shit. Um, And so, unfortunately, Smedley Butler was very right. War is a racket and has been for quite some fucking time. And I don't know if we'll ever not see war in our lifetimes. It'd be cool to get a little bit of time without some war, but I don't know if people have that in them. I don't know if war is something you can get away from because people always have conflict. There's always I always want what you have, or someone's buying favor, or another individual, has a reasoning. Marco Rubio also has a vendetta against Venezuela for Cuba, and so that was partially his influence to go into Venezuela. And listen, I'll say it, that was a badass thing they did. Went in, got the guy, got the fuck out. There's reports that they hit everybody there with like some kind of sonar ray that like fucking churns your insides or some shit. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, that's kind of fucking sick and sci-fi. Not gonna argue any of those points. It's not an argument to say that our military isn't fucking badass, but I also don't think they need a $1.5 trillion budget. I'm sorry. The Pentagon has failed its audit for 8 years in a row. There's no consequences to that, like at all. And the CIA just prints money for whatever they need to do, whether it's propaganda against us or another country. The FBI does. I don't even know what the FBI does, to be honest, because I haven't heard any of their fucking successes in quite some time. I mean, they're not stopping drugs from coming in. They're not, uh, you know, stopping terrorism like they, were part of doing from the early 2000s onward. So, I don't even know what the fuck they're doing other than lying. Um, so I don't know. You all this stuff that's going on, and just I'm not gonna argue if anybody's like I don't pay attention to this stuff, man, because it's just I want to have a nice, peaceful life. Listen, it's not peaceful. This shit is pretty aggressive. So I completely get it for anyone that doesn't want to pay attention, but at the same time, you can't sit here and not pay attention and then be angry and wonder, why your children have a fucked up future and wonder why, you know, my kid can't afford to buy a house. Well, that's because you supported the Iraq war in 2002. That's on you. You guys, he had what, a 97% approval rating or 99.5% or something crazy like that. And he used fear to get reelected, and they used propaganda to draw us into a 20 some odd year war that ended up with us pulling out and looking like dumbasses. And I wish that we could just pull back a little bit and just fucking stop the imperialism for a little while, fix what we got going on here so that like we can just normal Americans can afford to buy a house and fucking, go on vacation and live their lives a little bit without having to try to pick and choose which things are more important. That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. If you want to be honest, there would still be people beating the drum, and maybe I would too. But the only reason I got into this was because of what happened with COVID, and then the fact that you can't afford anything anymore. And yeah, me and my wife do all right, and we afford everything we want. But if things were like they were in the 70s, 60s, when you could do the single income thing and buy a home, and it was only 1.5 times your salary, and you could pay it off in 3 years, and you had a car, and your wife could stay at home and shit like that. Like, yeah, that's what we deserve, I think, as human beings. And I use the word deserve lightly because you still have to work hard, and you still have to do a job and contribute and give input. But good God, you take 40% of my money, you send it to other fucking people, you don't give me anything in return. And if I needed assistance, like one of these social safety nets that all these motherfuckers are sitting on and living off of, I couldn't get it if I tried because I actually work and bust my fucking ass. And if I was to hit a hardship, they'd still probably be like, damn, wish we could help you, but we can't because you're not poor enough and you're not easily manipulatable enough. You are one of those people who work, so you don't need us. So we don't want to help you. Come knocking on our door when you're destitute and homeless, and then we'll put the umbrella over you with the handcuffs attached to it so that we know you can't go anywhere and you got to listen to what we say. Same thing as when there are people complaining about the fucking food stamps. Like, you can't complain about shit that you didn't earn, motherfucker. You're using my tax dollars to go out and be a fat little piece of shit. I'm cool with you not getting snacks and sugar and all that kind of stuff. You need to be healthier anyway. Half of the reason that fucking healthcare costs $800 billion a fucking year is because you fat pieces of shit are out here just eating whatever. Teaching your kids poor fucking behaviors, all that type of shit. And I get it. The school system failed a lot of us, okay? When it comes to health and teaching people about health, it's all a whole lot of bullshit. They just fucking turned over the fucking pyramid. Hey, crazy thought, gluten and carbs aren't supposed to be the base of your fucking diet. They actually make you really fat and inflamed. Who would have fucking thought? But instead, nobody ever questioned it because we just didn't have the resources and the people willing to tell us the truth about it. But even now that we do, you're so fucking indoctrinated, half of you, that you're like, that's a lie. There's no way that could be true because, then it would disrupt whatever the fuck you got going on and you'd have to change some things about yourself. And I get it. Changing yourself is fucking difficult. It's hard. It sucks. But the reality is that if you don't ever change yourself, you'll never grow and develop and you'll always just be this fucking bum who lives off of the government. And to be quite frank, some of you, that's all you'll ever be. But don't you want to try to aspire to at least be better than that? So, with all that said, I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I think I got what I needed to get off my chest. That last little 3 minutes there really pushed out all the anger I was harboring. But hey, don't worry. I'll be back next week with a super angry rant full of more shit that I fucking hate and can't stand. Till then, have a great week. Peace.